Hello everyone, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about long-term planning in the West Midlands. And I'll be racing through some high-level ideas rather than lingering over the detail because Colin's given me a strict timetable to stick to, so please let me save up your questions till the end. What I want to do is talk through the background issues, give some idea about the size and scale of ambition we should be looking at, show you some ideas I've had and generally inspire you to come up with concepts that might challenge some conventional thinking and self-imposed constraints that we put on ourselves. The trigger for me looking at this was the West Midlands Rail Executive Rail Investment Strategy. The short and medium term aspects of this are pretty much nailed on, but for the long term it currently only defines service outcomes and not how to deliver them. And they're about to kick off a piece of consultancy work to look at how to deliver the long term objectives. So it's a great time for us to talk about and input into that process. After all, what's the name of our organisation? It's not Rail Tomorrow or Rail Next Week, it's Railfuture. So if we're not well placed to contribute to the long-term planning process, then who is? Should we just leave it to the professionals to get on with? I say no, because A, well, where's the fun in that? And B, the professionals have to work within the standard parameters they've been given of relatively conservative growth figures and having to establish a business case before even thinking about any kind of service. Any kind of prospect of being entrepreneurial has been removed. We're in a position to question and challenge those restrictions, set different criteria and propose solutions. Instead of 2% growth, what about a climate change addressing scenario where we need to triple capacity over 20 years, which would be 5% growth? If we successfully challenge those presumptions, it may give the professionals more room to explore being creative. There are hints of ambition in sections of the strategy and the headlines. We need to push these to be bold, not squeezed down to a minimum delivery. But before we get too far into the West Midlands, let's have a look at the national picture. Whatever is happening today with COVID and how it's affecting public transport usage, we can be certain that climate change isn't going away. And the transport sector as a whole is now the biggest emitter, showing little sign of improvement. It's quite optimistic and exciting to see the transport strategy saying, Public transport and active travel will be the natural first choice for our daily activities. We will use our cars less and be able to rely on a convenient, cost-effective and coherent public transport network. And that's not tucked away down on page 100, it's on the very first page of the ministerial forward. So if we're going to make a meaningful dent on climate change, we need to see massive expansion of public transport, not looking at small incremental changes, but something like doubling or tripling of capacity. I mean, even if rail mileage tripled, it would still be less than 30% of overall mileage. And in order to make a big dent on transport emissions, we need to target moving as many people as possible. 80% of car journeys are under 10 miles, so moving people around within densely populated urban areas should be the priority to achieve the fastest reduction in emissions. But it's not all about getting to just one centre. Birmingham City Council have done research, which they're now conveniently forgetting all about, which shows that moving around the area is, if anything, more important than just getting to its centres. Every public transport mode has a role to play in this, but I would suggest that given the size of the West Midlands conurbation, the speed of heavy rail needs to form the backbone of this local transport network if journey speeds are going to compete with the car. Lower performing modes such as bus or light rail will either restrict people to employment at their nearest local centre or just leave them in their cars heading towards the motorway box if they want to work further away. There are political aspects to consider too. Is this blue vehicle often seen hanging around on our streets and metro? It's clearly been branded as such, but is it just upselling a tram beyond its capability? What about this orange Class 730? I'd suggest that the Cross-City line is the closest thing we have to a metro service, and then only in the section north of New Street where it's got pretty much exclusive use of the tracks. It's important because our mayor is putting a fair amount of political capital behind delivering a successful metro. So we need to encourage him to put his metro sticker onto heavy rail services too. And saying that when he's saying that he's going to deliver a metro system, that's our level of expectation about its performance. Let's have a look at the mayor's election map. So it's a bold and ambitious plan. The comments that I've got are that the most capable transport mode of heavy rail is drawn in a thin line, with the metro lines, although we're not quite sure how they're going to be delivered, as a thick line. Now, you don't draw motorways on a map with a thin line, so why do that with public transport? And the way we draw our system diagrams and maps does influence customer behaviour, as demonstrated by overground. One other point that I'd highlight is that getting to the NEC and airport area still requires most people to go via New Street to do it. The economic aspect is significant because a very big chunk of site-specific uplift in a region is forecast to come from the development around the NEC area. So, what transport are people going to use to get to that area? Well, the Urban Growth Corporation's current plans are pretty much business as usual, with lots of road. On top of HS2's 7,500 car parking spaces built in the Green Belt, we've got an extra bonus of an extra motorway junction and making the M42 10 lanes wide for quite a considerable section. In total, it's looking at over £1 billion of road building. So shouldn't we be putting more emphasis on other modes if we're serious about tackling climate change? Passengers. What things make passengers happy? Well, the number one is reliability, which explains why West Midlands commuters are not happy, because New Street is frankly quite dire pre-COVID, with in the bottom 15% of performance for punctuality and generally wrecking passenger satisfaction and their confidence in using public transport. Virtually half of services in the afternoon peak were 5 minutes more late or cancelled. It's just how to destroy passenger satisfaction and confidence. So that tells us something about the needs we're looking at. What about the options that are being considered to solve them? The best place to go to learn about these is the route study. I've just pulled out some selected highlights from the study. At a very broad level, it's looked at either enhancing New Street or other stations around the area. The scale of enhancements in and around New Street were really very large, but it still highlights how big a problem it is. Our customers are made happy by reliability, but complexity and operating at full capacity are the enemies of reliability. It also looked at a station under New Street as a way to increase capacity beyond the Midlands Rail hub. So the scale of price tags we should be looking at is measured in the multiple billions. It clearly identifies that on its own, Midlands Rail hub is only a medium-term solution, still leaving Northampton as a problem, New Street just less bad, and south of Kings Norton heavily congested. When we look south of New Street, we see quite a long to-do list involving 2 lots of grade separation. Now, how disruptive will that be and how long will it take? And it's not really delivering a transformational capacity increase. There's no extra suburban or freight services, only increases to cross-country. Should we as a collective and the industry come up with just a single solution? I would say no. A single solution leads to groupthink and a lack of creativity. Whereas if multiple distinct options are brought forward, it makes critical comparison of those various options much easier. But it is a very complex subject, so the audience for that needs to be a well-informed and engaged set of industry stakeholders. So that's all the inputs you need to consider. There's only a few things there, aren't there? You just need to pause for a little while and think about them and mull them all over. This is the concept I'd like you to imagine. I'm not saying it's the solution, but at the very least it tackles the problem in a completely different way. Imagine a piece of connectivity running from Whiteacre Junction in the north, skirting around a built area via International, connecting towards destinations in the southwest around Longbridge. The majority of distant cross-country services are then pulled out of New Street to International, which becomes the primary cross-country interchange. If I'm just interchanging in the West Midlands, do I really care where it is, as long as it works and most of my connections are in the same place? Let's make International twice as big. There's plenty of space currently available within its footprint. which gives plenty of platforms, so services can dwell there for much longer, allowing passengers to get on and off their services without being rushed. And flexibility for when things don't quite run to time, which is much more likely with distant cross-country services. This relieves the critical Wolverhampton and Kings Norton corridors, providing capacity there for much higher frequency metro services. And at New Street, simpler, less complex operating patterns occur, so if something does go wrong, then recovery is much faster with a simpler service pattern. And what's the distance to international? It's 9 minutes. So the combination of a faster orbital route instead of a slow trug through Kings Norton may only add 5 minutes to the overall journey times, even from the southwest. But if that boosts reliability from 50% to 90%, I'd suggest it's a trade-off that passengers will be happy to make. But that's just the first step. Let's add some more. What happens if we take that extra capacity towards the east and south of the city, and then we throw in a few more segments of beaching reverse? Now, each segment on its own isn't particularly exciting, but combined, we can create a complete orbital ring around the built-up car part of the accommodation, and overground for the West Midlands. If we look at what network that could create, it gets rather interesting. I'd suggest that it creates a lot more ways to move around the conurbation and much better access to the big job sites at the NEC. And if New Street catches a cold, it gives passengers themselves a way to route round problems. That resilience increasing their confidence in using public transport as their primary means of getting around the conurbation. If we contrast that with the Mayor's much more Birmingham city centre centric plans, I think it gives a lot more options for different journey patterns to emerge. And I also don't think it helps that the Birmingham City Council is based in the centre of Birmingham, as is the Mayor and Transport for West Midlands, and that the combined authority cabinet member responsible for transport is the leader of Birmingham City Council, which inevitably leads to rather Birmingham City centric thinking about transport. If anyone's going, okay, so that's a nice idea, but there's no way to get a railway around where you've drawn your line, I've gone over some moderately detailed alignment design, but I'm not going to dwell over that here because it's just too much detail, really. But apart from stopping at the NEC area. So we can see here we've got a range of extra tracks along current alignments and a few extra bits and pieces thrown in. So I'd ask you the question, would you prefer to see this scale of railway development or what's currently on the cards for lots of extra road? So thank you very much for listening, and now it's question time. And I'd just like to close up the presentation by giving a quick plug for my other project that I'm working heavily on at the moment, which is the Welland Valley Rail Partnership. So pop over to our website at wvr.org.uk to have a look at our project out there, which is hoping to bring together Kettering, Corby, Stamford, Peterborough, which currently don't have a service between them, and we're also hoping to stop at some other places on the way and further out to the east. Thank you very much.